911 operators. What's the funniest thing you had a kid call in? My mom was a 911 operator. When telling us about her new job, she was describing to my brother and I that she got a job at the place you call 911. Next day, mom's at work. My brother calls 911 just to tell mom about his day. Goodbye inbox. Too bad it's on my throwaway. To answer one of the questions, I was in 4th grade, my brother in 2nd. My cousin called because she was giving her lizard a bath and it went down the drain. It was like a tiny house gecko named Steve. She called 911 crying that Steve was drowning and had gone down the drain. By the time the dispatcher figured out Steve was a gecko, the police and fire department were already pulling in. She was like 6 or so and I still tease her about it. I do feel bad for Steve though. A 4-year-old called in to say that his dad took his trick-or-treat candy. Yeah, he took it so the kid wouldn't fill his face in a single night. The dad was planning to ration it out. My older brother said he called the cops on me for something. So I called them back to say nothing was wrong and that he was lying because I was scared. My dad was pissed. My dad was the chief of police when I was growing up. And I spent a lot of time at the station. When I was 4 or 5, my mom wouldn't let me do something. So I called the emergency line free 911 days, and after the XXX police. What is your emergency? Greeting. I very sternly requested that they arrest my mother. The dispatcher recognized the address I was calling from and called my dad to tell him that I was on the emergency line and what I wanted. I got a lecture that night, but from what my dad says, they had a good laugh about it at the station. My uncle is a dispatcher in my hometown. He always tells me the story of this 4-year-old who called 911 because his older brother farted on him his ear. Young teen just had her first menstrual cycle. My brother called the police on me because I wouldn't let him watch The Simpsons when we were younger. Told them I was being mean to him his ear. They called my parents back for a very interesting conversation. When we were younger and home alone, my sister called the police on my brother because they both wanted the same In-N-Out burger. We had 4 identical burgers, but they wanted the same one. The police came to our house and explained to us why we shouldn't call the police for no reason. Our mom came home in the middle of their lecture. She was not happy. When I was 4 years old, I was watching a fire safety video. They told me to call 911, so I did. My favorite call recently was from an 11-year-old kid who was walking home from school and got lost. He called 999 in a panic, so I told him to stay where he was until officers arrived. We didn't have officers available for about 30 minutes, so we just spent half an hour chatting about Fortnite. I guess not exactly a funny call, but it was enjoyable. Not an operator, but my uncle, who is an alcoholic, would show up at our house growing up. Usually not a big deal, but usually had to call the police to take him back to the halfway house. One time this happened while my mom was out, so my brother called 911. When they answered, "Hello 911. What's your emergency?" My brother, who was maybe 10, answered, "Hello. This is not an emergency." Not an operator, but a responder. A few years back, one kid called 911 on his brother not letting him play Xbox. My friend, the operator, put me in for a conference call. In the background I heard this guy shout, "Holy shit, he's taking the truck." Apparently, the parents made the kid get off the Xbox and go outside, so the kid did the logical thing. Steal the UPS truck parked across the street. On a Saturday morning about 7 a.m. I was sleeping in and my 2-yo called 911 because he wanted breakfast. I didn't know till a sheriff was knocking on the front door doing a welfare check. I would love to have heard that conversation. I had a 6-year-old girl accidentally call 911 saying that her mommy and daddy were making whoopee. I had flashbacks of Family Feud and laughed so hard. I waited a few minutes and called back, and her mom tried to play it off saying they were wrapping Christmas presents. Yeah, sure lady, if your present is a new little brother or sister. I had a kid ask me if my refrigerator was working. I replied with, "Do you mean is it running?" Quote, he cussed at me and then hung up. Not a 911 operator, but my parents love to bring this story up, so I thought I'd share. One morning when I was about 4 or 5, I called 911 to tell them that nobody in the house was dead. They wanted to speak to my parents, and I kept insisting they didn't need to because no one was dead. Eventually I hung up on them and they called back and got to speak to my parents. WHO were alive as promised. I once pocket-dialed 911 while playing airsoft. When I got back to my car and was able to look at my phone, I saw I had a 12-minute phone call, and several missed calls from what I later found out was the local sheriff's office. Well, the secretary was not happy. When I finally got to talk to the sheriff, he laughed it off and said it was no biggie, as it was **CK nowhere and nothing really ever happened. Still got told to be more careful about having my phone in my pocket and not locking it before putting it away. My buddy's dad was a state trooper. He was home alone when he was like 12, and called 911 and asked them to tell daddy to bring Doritos when he comes home. My childhood best friend was trying to call my house and accidentally dialed 911 instead. When they answered, she said, "OSH*T, to my surprise because I wasn't allowed to swear, and hung up. When police showed up, we hid because her mom had taught her police always had to take you to jail if they came, and used it as a threat anytime her kids were acting up. Her mom was pulling in the driveway and the officer was knocking on the door and yelled, 'Friend's name, looks like you're going to jail.'" Quote, as she came in, her and the officer had a pretty stern talk about using the police as threats. We heard it and our hiding place was found because of our laughing. I called 911 when I was about 5 or so just to see if it would work. Naturally, an operator answered almost immediately and caught me off guard. When asked what the emergency was, all I could manage to say was my name before I quickly hung up the phone. They called back and talked to my mom, who wasn't thrilled when they asked if I was okay. My dementia client called once to ask for the number for Air Canada. He thought we were stuck in England. We're in Canada. I worked as a 911 operator while I was in college, and one time a young child called in. Sounds like they were maybe 4 or 5 from their speech. And the first thing the child said when I picked up the phone was, "Help, I shitted and farted." I could barely contain my laughter as this young child was essentially screaming, "I shitted and farted, I need help 'cause I shitted and farted." This kid called in because his parents weren't waking up. He was very scared and sobbing. I was on the phone with him while we dispatched EMT, police, OD, to the residence. I was trying to get him to focus on me when he farted very loudly. It made my day lol. I called in a fake bomb threat when I was a kid. Deepened my voice and everything. Still feel pretty bad about that. I called the cops on my older brother when I was 6. He wouldn't let me into our room this year. They called back and told my parents. When I was 4, I called 911 on my parents for forcing me to eat fish for dinner. They promptly called back and my mom answered. Let's just say I never complained about eating fish ever again. I had a little boy call 911 to tell me he was hungry and needed breakfast. I asked him if he was alone and he said no, his sister was watching him, but she was sleeping. I told him he should go wake his sister to have her make them breakfast. He said she is real mean and she won't be nice to me. I said, "Okay, you stay in the house and I will take care of this." His mom was an EMT, so I knew his family. I called his grandma and had her go take care of the breakfast crisis, and his sister had no idea. His mom later called to apologize, and I just asked her to explain the general rules of 911. My sister is a 911 operator, and a kid stole her principal's phone to call the police because they thought homework was a crime. When I was a little kid, I was in the house by myself. The phone rang, so I debated whether to pick it up or let it ring. Ended up picking it up, but by the time I did, the pre-recorded message was already in progress. It was about how you could call 9 now. What I didn't hear was that calling 9 was short for 911. So I, being curious, call 9. I panic pretty hard when I hear the operator and hang up without saying anything. They call back, but my dad had come in from the backyard and hurriedly answers the phone. He ends up convincing them not to send a car. Now why was I alone? All the adults were in the backyard setting up for my cousin's wedding. She didn't know about it till I told her at 17.